the study hall, everyone. And it is time for, but why though? You know, this segment where we like to explore the origins of, well, pretty much everything.
Pretty much.
And today, I thought it'd be interesting to take a look at something that shapes a lot of our lives, something that's, well, always there, the work week.
Ah, yes. The Monday to Friday grind. A tale as old as time.
Older than you might think, actually. We're going to do a deep dive into the whole history of the work week, going all the way back to ancient times. We'll trace its journey through history, right through the Industrial Revolution, and to, well, where we are today. And we'll look at all the factors that shaped it along the way: religion, labor needs, you name it.
It's fascinating to consider, isn't it? I mean, we just assume that a 5-day work week is just the natural order of things, but it's actually a relatively recent development.
Yeah. And the path to get here is full of twists and turns. Societies all over the world have had all sorts of different ways of organizing work and rest. So, our mission today is to, step outside our own modern perspective and really understand how, folks in the past structured their lives around work.
Absolutely. I think you'll be surprised by some of the things we've uncovered.
I think so, too. Okay, so, to start, let's travel back in time, way back, to ancient Mesopotamia.
All right, picture this. The Babylonian civilization, one of the earliest known civilizations. And they were already using a structured 7-day cycle closely linked to, get this, the phases of the moon.
So their concept of a week was literally tied to the moon cycles. That's, so different from our clock-based week.
Exactly, but here's where it gets really interesting. Every 7th day was considered holy. Certain activities were forbidden. And the 28th day of the lunar month, that was their big day of rest. It was explicitly termed a day of rest. There's even a record that says, and I quote, every 7th day was marked as a holy or rest day. The 28th day of the lunar month is explicitly termed a day of rest. So you see, the idea of a regular rest day goes way, way back.
So, even in ancient Mesopotamia, people understood the need for a break.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, so now let's move from Mesopotamia to another ancient culture that had a huge influence on how we structure our time today, the ancient Hebrews.
Right. They also had a 7-day week, but they really formalized the concept of a weekly rest day with the Sabbath, or Shabbat, as it's known in Hebrew.
Yeah, the Sabbath. The 6 days shall you labor, and on the 7th day you shall rest, kind of thing.
Precisely. And it wasn't just a suggestion, it was a divine commandment, a core part of their religious law. The Sabbath was sacred. All work stopped, from sunset on Friday to sunset on Saturday. And this cycle, this continuous weekly cycle with a mandated day of rest, well, it was pretty unique for its time.
So the Babylonians had a rest day, but it was kind of tied to the moon, while the Hebrews made it a regular weekly thing with a deep religious meaning. Fascinating how these different cultures approached it. Now, I want to hop over to ancient Egypt for a second. They did things a little differently, right?
They did indeed. They had a 10-day cycle, 9 days of work followed by a day of rest. Historical records refer to a 10-day week with a built-in rest day as their norm.
9 days on, 1 day off. Wow, that sounds kind of intense. Why do you think they did it that way?
Well, one theory is that it was all about productivity. Think about the massive projects they undertook, like the pyramids. Those required sustained labor over long periods. Maybe the system allowed for more concentrated work with a guaranteed recovery day at the end.
That's interesting. Different priorities leading to different systems. Okay, so we've got Mesopotamia, the Hebrews, Egypt. What about ancient China? How did they handle work and rest?
China also used a 10-day cycle called the Sun, but what's fascinating about their system is they had specific rules about rest for their government officials. Starting in the Han Dynasty, these officials had to take a day off every 5 days.
Every 5 days. Wow. That's surprisingly generous for a big ancient empire.
Right. And these breaks, they called them wash days, or huan in Chinese. It was a time for officials to, well, wash their clothes, freshen up, take care of personal things.
So the bureaucrats had a 4-day work week. What about everyone else? Farmers, laborers, all those folks.
For the majority of people who were mostly farmers, their work schedule was dictated by the agricultural seasons and the many, many festivals throughout the year. They didn't have a set weekly rest day like the officials.
Right, because farming is so dependent on the seasons and the weather. So we've got lunar cycles, divine commandments, 10-day cycles with built-in breaks. What about ancient Greece? Did they have a system like this?
Ancient Greece didn't have a regular weekly rest day like some of the other cultures we've talked about. They followed lunar calendars with roughly 10-day periods called decades. But their main breaks from work were tied to religious and civic festivals.
So their downtime was more like a celebration, a community event, not just a day to chill out at home.
Exactly. Now, if we shift our focus to early Rome, they had a rather unique system as well.
Yeah, I remember reading something about that. Fill me in.
So the Romans used an 8-day cycle called the nundinal cycle. Every 8th day, the nundinae, was market day.
Market day, that was their rest day.
Well, not exactly a full rest day, but it served as a break, especially for people in rural areas. Courts wouldn't meet, and the day was mainly for commerce and public affairs. Farmers would come to town to trade and socialize. It was a break from their usual labor.
So a market day also functioned as a kind of community gathering and a chance to take a pause from work.
Interesting. All right, so we've seen all these different systems for organizing work and rest. Lunar rhythms, religious laws, 10-day cycles, market days. How did we end up with the 7-day week that we know and sometimes love today?
That's where the influence of Judaism and Christianity becomes really important. We've already talked about the Sabbath in Judaism, a divinely ordained day of rest every seventh day. That concept had a huge impact on Western culture.
And then Christianity, coming out of Judaism, adopted its own version of the weekly rest day.
Right. Early Christians started observing Sunday as their holy day, commemorating the resurrection of Jesus. And a key moment that solidified this was in the year 321 CE, when the Roman Emperor Constantine, who had converted to Christianity, issued an edict.
Oh yeah, Constantine. Big name in history. What did he do? Well, he made two big decisions. First, he officially adopted the 7-day week for the Roman Empire. And second, he declared Sunday a legal day of rest. His edict even said, this is a famous quote, "On the venerable day of the sun, let all workshops be closed." So that's how Sunday became the standard day off in much of the Western world.
So it's thanks to Constantine that we have Sundays off. I mean, not all of us, but, a lot of people do. Now, what about Islam? I know Friday is an important day for Muslims. Is it considered a full day of rest, like the Sabbath or Sunday?
That's a good question. Friday, or Jumu'ah, is very significant in Islam. It's the day for the congregational prayer, the Alat al-Jumu'ah. But historically, it didn't necessarily mean a complete stop to work like the Sabbath or the Christian Sunday. The Quran actually says, disperse and seek God's bounty after the prayer. So there's an emphasis on prayer, but also on continuing with life's activities. The idea of Friday as a full day of rest in many Muslim-majority countries is actually a more modern development influenced by the global adoption of the weekend.
So Judaism, Christianity, and Islam all played a part in shaping the idea of a weekly rest day. But as we've seen, there were other ways of taking breaks from work in pre-industrial times too.
Definitely. We can't forget about things like the Roman Nundinae, which was a break every 8 days tied to the market cycle. And in agricultural societies all over the world, festivals played a huge role. These festivals were often religious holidays where work was forbidden, or at least reduced. Interestingly, in medieval Europe, some communities had more of these holidays than we have weekend days now.
Wait, really? More days off back then than we have now?
In some cases, yes. It's a bit counterintuitive, isn't it? But it reminds us that the idea of a fixed 2-day weekend is actually a relatively modern invention.
Totally. So we've got these ancient and pre-industrial societies with all sorts of different rhythms of work and rest. Then along comes the Industrial Revolution, and everything changes, right?
It was a massive shift. Factories brought about standardized schedules and a real focus on timekeeping. Workdays became incredibly long, often 12 to 16 hours a day, 6 days a week. There wasn't much room for the flexibility and intermittent breaks that people were used to in pre-industrial times.
That's rough.
It was. And get this, in the mid-19th century, some factory workers were putting in an estimated 96 hours a week.
96 hours. Seriously, that's insane. No wonder people started pushing back.
Exactly. These harsh conditions gave rise to labor movements that fought for better working hours. One of the most famous was the 8 hours movement, which advocated for, you guessed it, 8 hours of work, 8 hours of sleep, and 8 hours of leisure.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
People need time to rest and recharge. And religion was still a factor in these debates too, right? Especially when it came to Sunday.
Absolutely. Groups that were really dedicated to observing the Sabbath, the Sabbatarians, campaigned hard to protect Sunday as a day of rest. They were totally against any kind of work on that day. And their efforts played a big part in reinforcing the idea that everyone deserved a regular day off each week.
So we start to see the seeds of the modern weekend being planted.
Yes, and that's where the Saturday half-holiday movement comes in. They wanted to get people off work by noon on Saturday, creating a partial weekend.
Half weekend, baby steps, I guess.
Exactly. And even some employers thought this was a good idea. They figured a shorter Saturday would mean workers would be more refreshed and productive on Monday, kind of a give a little, get a little approach.
So how did this idea of a weekend, something that originated in the West, spread to other parts of the world?
Well, as Western influence grew through things like colonialism and modernization, other cultures started to adapt and incorporate the concept of a weekly rest day. For example, in Japan, they adopted Sunday as a public holiday as part of their efforts to modernize in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. And in many Muslim-majority countries, Friday or a Friday-Saturday combination became the weekend, blending Islamic tradition with the global trend.
It's amazing to see how this idea of a weekend traveled around the world and took on different forms in different cultures. Looking back at all the systems we've talked about, what are some of the biggest similarities and differences you see?
Well, one thing that's really consistent across cultures and time periods is the recognition that people need rest. Whether it's for religious reasons, to recover from physical labor, or just to maintain well-being, the need for breaks is universal. And religion has often played a key role in defining and giving meaning to those breaks. We also see the influence of agriculture in many societies. Planting, harvesting, and seasonal festivals all shaped the rhythms of work and leisure.
And the differences.
Well, the most obvious difference is how rest was structured. Some cultures had a weekly rest day, others had breaks that were tied to market cycles or festivals. The length of the week itself varied too. We saw 7-day weeks, 8-day weeks, even 10-day weeks. And the reasons for taking breaks differed as well. Sometimes it was purely religious, sometimes it was more about practical needs, and sometimes it was a mix of both. But one of the most interesting developments was the Jewish concept of a continually cycling week with a mandated rest day every seventh day. That had a profound impact on the development of the work week as we know it.
So it seems like there were lots of different ways to balance work and rest throughout history.
Absolutely. It was always a negotiation between the need to get things done and the need to take care of oneself.
So wrapping things up, it seems like by the late 19th and early 20th centuries, we're starting to see a global trend toward the 7-day week with the weekend.
Yeah, with the rise of industrialization and the Gregorian calendar, that model became pretty dominant. Even though different cultures might have different days for their weekend, the idea of having roughly 5 work days and 2 days off is pretty widespread now.
Wow, so that's the journey of the work week, from ancient moon rituals to the modern weekends. What a story.
It really is.
So what's the big takeaway here? What should we remember from all this?
I think the key takeaway is that the weekend, something we often take for granted, is not just some random modern invention. It has roots that go way back in time in religious beliefs, labor practices, and cultural traditions from all over the world. It's a reminder that even something as basic as how we structure our week has a long and fascinating history.
Yeah, and there were definitely some surprising moments along the way. I was really struck by the fact that they had dedicated rest days in ancient Mesopotamia. I mean, that's so long ago. And who knew that medieval peasants might have had more holidays than people in the early Industrial Revolution? And all the different lengths of weeks and how religion played such a big role. It's really amazing to think about,
It makes you wonder how the work week will continue to evolve in the future.
right? Will we stick with the 5-day week, or will something else emerge? Will we see a return to shorter work weeks or more flexibility? It's definitely something to ponder. Maybe our listeners can think about the history of work and rest traditions in their own cultures, too. There are probably all sorts of interesting stories waiting to be discovered.
I think you're right about that.
Well, that brings us to the end of this But Why Though segment here on Study Hall. Thanks for joining us on this fascinating journey.
It was my pleasure.
And we'll see you next time for another deep dive into the origins of, well, who knows what.